When Sarah Martinez pulled a burning Cessna 172 out of a deadly spin at 500 feet with no pilot's license, emergency radio chatter, or official clearance, the aviation world called it impossible. What they didn't know was that the woman they'd labeled equipment failure had just saved 47 lives on the ground, while proving that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying this story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Technical Sergeant Sarah Martinez had been working the civilian maintenance hangar at Phoenix Sky Harbor's General Aviation Terminal for 18 months when the whispers started. Unlike the other mechanics who gathered around coffee machines, sharing weekend plans and complaint sessions, Sarah kept her head down and her hands busy. Her military background had taught her that excellence spoke louder than words, and her discharge papers from the Air Force carried commendations that most career pilots never earned. At 32, Sarah possessed the kind of quiet competence that made aircraft owners specifically request her for inspections. Her logbooks were immaculate, her diagnostic accuracy legendary among the mechanics, and her ability to spot potential failures had prevented more incidents than anyone bothered to count. She approached every engine like it carried precious cargo, because in her mind, it always did. The hangar buzzed with the controlled chaos of morning operations. Private aircraft lined the tarmac outside, their polished surfaces reflecting the Arizona sun, while pilots conducted pre-flight checks and wealthy executives hurried toward business meetings in distant cities. Sarah worked methodically through a Piper Cherokee's annual inspection, her trained eyes catching details that others might miss. Her military service had been cut short, not by incompetence or misconduct, but by an injury sustained during a training exercise that left her with a slight limp and a medical discharge that ended her dreams of becoming a military pilot. The irony wasn't lost on her that she now spent her days ensuring aircraft were safe for others to fly, while she remained grounded by paperwork and regulations that valued credentials over capability. "Martinez, you're needed in the office," called Jake Morrison, the facility supervisor, his voice carrying across the hangar floor. Sarah wiped her hands on her coveralls and made her way through the maze of aircraft and equipment toward the administrative offices housed in the terminal building. Morrison was reviewing paperwork when she entered, his expression professional but slightly uncomfortable. "Sarah, we need to discuss the Patterson incident from last week." The Patterson incident had been a textbook example of Sarah's diagnostic abilities. She had identified a developing crack in a propeller hub that the previous inspector had missed, grounding the aircraft hours before what could have been a catastrophic in-flight failure. "Sir, the crack was clearly visible under magnification. The aircraft was unsafe for flight," Sarah replied, maintaining the respectful tone that had served her well in military service. Morrison nodded, but his discomfort was obvious. "That's not the issue. The problem is that Patterson is claiming you exceeded your authority by grounding his aircraft without proper consultation." Sarah felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. In the military, preventing disasters was celebrated. In civilian aviation, apparently, it could become a liability if it inconvenienced the wrong people. The aircraft presented an immediate safety hazard. Federal regulations clearly state that any maintenance personnel can ground an aircraft if they identify unsafe conditions. "You're right about the regulations," Morrison acknowledged, "but Patterson has connections with the airport authority. He's suggesting that perhaps our maintenance standards are becoming overly cautious, creating unnecessary delays for aircraft owners." The conversation felt like a trap, each word carefully chosen to make Sarah question her professional judgment. Sarah had encountered similar situations during her military service. Officers who preferred convenient compliance over inconvenient excellence. The difference was that in the Air Force, safety protocols were sacred. In civilian aviation, They competed with profit margins and customer satisfaction surveys. I understand the concerns about customer relations, Sarah said carefully, but I won't compromise safety standards to avoid inconveniencing aircraft owners. Morrison's expression suggested he had expected this response. No one's asking you to compromise safety. We're just suggesting that perhaps consultation with senior staff might be appropriate before making grounding decisions. The new protocol felt like the beginning of something Sarah recognized from her military experience. The slow erosion of authority disguised as procedural improvement. The systematic undermining of competence through bureaucratic obstacles. She had seen excellent soldiers destroyed by commanders who viewed their expertise as a threat to established hierarchies. After the meeting, Sarah returned to the hangar floor where her colleagues were preparing aircraft for afternoon departures. Chief Mechanic David Reyes, a 20-year veteran of civilian aviation, approached her with obvious concern. Heard you had a talk with Morrison about the Patterson grounding. Sarah nodded, checking her tools while considering how much to share. He's implementing new consultation requirements for grounding decisions. David's expression darkened. That's administrative interference with safety protocols. Everyone knows you saved Patterson's life by catching that crack. Apparently saving lives doesn't matter if it creates paperwork, Sarah replied, her frustration evident despite her attempts to maintain professionalism. David looked around the hangar, ensuring their conversation remained private. Sarah, there's something you need to know. Word is that Patterson isn't the only one complaining about your work. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Sarah had maintained perfect records, caught problems that others missed, and earned the respect of pilots and mechanics throughout the facility. The idea that her competence was generating complaints seemed impossible to comprehend. What kind of complaints? She asked, though part of her already knew the answer. David's expression was grim. The kind that question your judgment, your authority, your right to make safety decisions. The kind that come from people who don't like being told their expensive toys are dangerous. Sarah spent the remainder of her shift reviewing every decision she had made, every aircraft she had grounded, every safety concern she had raised. Her record was spotless, her procedures textbook perfect, her safety ratings among the highest in the facility. But she was learning that excellence could become a liability when it threatened the wrong people's convenience. That evening, alone in her small apartment overlooking the desert, Sarah stared at her military commendations and wondered if competence was destined to be punished regardless of the uniform she wore. She had transitioned from military to civilian service, believing that skills and dedication would be valued equally in both worlds. Instead, she was discovering that some battles never ended, they just changed uniforms. The fight between excellence and mediocrity, between safety and convenience, between doing what's right and doing what's easy. Sarah Martinez had spent her entire career on the side of excellence, and she wasn't about to surrender now. Outside her window, aircraft lights traced patterns across the night sky, each one representing lives that depended on the competence and integrity of people like her. People who understood that some things were more important than customer satisfaction, more valuable than avoiding inconvenience, more sacred than keeping wealthy aircraft owners happy. The storm was coming, and Sarah Martinez was about to discover that her military training had prepared her for battles she never expected to fight. Regional Airport Director Marcus Harrington arrived at Phoenix Sky Harbor's General Aviation Terminal on a Tuesday morning with the kind of swagger that announced his presence before he spoke a word. His expensive suit contrasted sharply with the practical work clothes worn by mechanics and ground crew, while his gold watch caught the morning sunlight streaming through the terminal windows. At 45, Harrington had built his career on understanding that aviation was ultimately about money, and money flowed from keeping wealthy aircraft owners satisfied. Harrington's appointment to the regional director position had surprised many in the aviation community. His background was in business management rather than aviation operations, and his previous experience came from managing luxury car dealerships where customer service meant never saying no to anyone with sufficient resources. The airport authority had hired him specifically to improve customer relations and increase revenue from the general aviation sector. Within his first month, Harrington had implemented what he called customer-centric protocols that prioritized client satisfaction over what he viewed as unnecessarily rigid operational procedures. His philosophy was simple. Happy customers generated repeat business, referrals, and positive reviews that attracted more wealthy aircraft owners to the facility. Unhappy customers took their business elsewhere, along with their substantial fees and fuel purchases. Sarah Martinez represented everything that made Harrington uncomfortable about the aviation industry. Her military precision, unwavering attention to safety protocols, and refusal to compromise standards created exactly the kind of friction he had been hired to eliminate. When wealthy aircraft owners complained about delays, cancellations, or additional maintenance requirements, her name appeared consistently in their grievances. The Patterson incident had been particularly problematic from Harrington's perspective. Thomas Patterson owned a construction empire worth several $100 million and kept his personal aircraft at the facility, specifically because of its reputation for accommodating high-profile clients. When Sarah grounded his Piper Cherokee for what Patterson described as microscopic imperfections, he had threatened to relocate his aircraft and encourage other wealthy owners to follow suit. Harrington understood that aviation safety was important, but he also understood that safety concerns could be managed through proper customer relations and diplomatic problem-solving. The key was finding mechanics who understood the delicate balance between regulatory compliance and customer satisfaction. Sarah Martinez clearly lacked this understanding, viewing every minor defect as grounds for dramatic action that inconvenienced important clients. During his morning walk through the maintenance hangar, Harrington observed Sarah working on a Cessna Citations engine inspection. Her methodology was thorough to the point of obsession, examining components that other mechanics might quickly approve. She documented every finding in detailed reports that created paper trails and potential liability issues. Her approach generated exactly the kind of bureaucratic complications that discouraged repeat business. "Morrison," Harrington called to the facility supervisor, "I need to discuss our maintenance protocols with you." The two men retreated to Morrison's office, where Harrington outlined his concerns about what he termed excessive maintenance rigor that was creating customer relations problems throughout the facility. Sarah Martinez is technically competent, Harrington acknowledged, but her approach lacks the flexibility necessary for superior customer service. She treats every minor issue as a catastrophic safety concern, creating unnecessary delays and generating complaints from our most valuable clients. Morrison shifted uncomfortably, clearly torn between supporting his employee and satisfying his superior. "Her safety record is perfect," Morrison offered weakly. "She's prevented several potential incidents through her attention to detail." Harrington waved dismissively. "I'm not questioning her technical abilities. I'm questioning her judgment about when those abilities should be applied. Aviation safety is important, but so is maintaining positive relationships with clients who keep this facility profitable." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Harrington outlining his vision for what he called balanced maintenance practices that considered both safety requirements and customer satisfaction. He wanted mechanics who understood that wealthy aircraft owners deserved special consideration, that minor defects could often be monitored rather than immediately addressed, and that grounding expensive aircraft should be reserved for genuinely catastrophic problems. "I want you to speak with Martinez about adapting her approach," Harrington instructed. "She needs to understand that her job involves more than just following technical manuals. Customer relations are equally important, and her current methods are creating friction with our most valuable clients. Morrison nodded reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. After Morrison left to carry out his instructions, Harrington reviewed the customer feedback reports that had accumulated on his desk. Patterson's complaint was detailed and angry, describing Sarah's actions as overly aggressive and unnecessarily disruptive to business operations. Similar complaints from other aircraft owners painted a picture of a maintenance facility that prioritized technical perfection over practical customer service. The solution seemed obvious to Harrington. Sarah Martinez needed to understand that her role extended beyond mechanical competence to include customer satisfaction. Aircraft owners who spent millions on their aircraft deserved mechanics who appreciated the business implications of maintenance. Decisions. Technical expertise without customer service awareness was ultimately counterproductive. Harrington's experience in luxury automotive sales had taught him that wealthy clients expected special treatment, personalized service, and solutions that accommodated their schedules and priorities. The aviation industry operated under more stringent safety regulations, but those regulations still allowed for judgment calls and flexible interpretations that could satisfy both regulatory requirements and customer expectations. The challenge was convincing mechanics like Sarah Martinez that their job involved more than following technical procedures. They needed to understand the business context of their decisions, the financial implications of aircraft groundings, and the importance of maintaining positive relationships with clients who generated substantial revenue for the facility. During his afternoon review of maintenance logs, Harrington discovered additional examples of what he considered Sarah's overly cautious approach. She had recommended expensive component replacements that other mechanics might have deferred, identified potential problems that fell within acceptable operational parameters, and created detailed documentation that could potentially expose the facility to liability issues if accidents occurred elsewhere. Her thoroughness, while technically admirable, created exactly the kind of regulatory scrutiny and customer complaints that Harrington had been hired to minimize. Aviation authorities appreciated detailed maintenance records, but aircraft owners preferred efficient service that kept their aircraft operational with minimal disruption to their schedules. The solution required systematic changes to the maintenance protocols, beginning with clear guidelines about when aircraft should be grounded versus when defects could be monitored through increased inspection intervals. Harrington envisioned a more flexible approach that considered the aircraft owner's operational requirements alongside technical safety considerations. Sarah Martinez's military background probably contributed to her inflexible adherence to technical procedures, but civilian aviation required more nuanced decision-making that balanced multiple priorities. Harrington was confident that proper guidance and clear expectations would help her understand the broader context of her responsibilities. The meeting with senior staff that afternoon focused on implementing what Harrington called enhanced customer service protocols for the maintenance department. These protocols emphasize the importance of considering client relationships when making technical decisions, encouraging consultation with management before taking actions that might inconvenience important customers. Our goal is maintaining the highest safety standards while providing exceptional customer service, Harrington explained to the assembled supervisors. That means finding creative solutions that satisfy both regulatory requirements and client expectations. We want to be known as the facility that says yes whenever possible, not the one that constantly creates obstacles for aircraft owners. The new protocols would require mechanics to justify aircraft groundings through detailed consultations with management, ensuring that customer impact was considered alongside technical concerns. Harrington was confident that these changes would improve both customer satisfaction and operational efficiency while maintaining appropriate safety standards. As evening approached and the day shift prepared to end, Harrington felt satisfied. with the progress toward his vision of a more customer-focused operation. The changes would take time to implement fully, but early indications suggested that staff members understood the importance of balancing technical excellence with superior customer service. Sarah Martinez would need to adapt to these new realities or find employment elsewhere. Harrington had no intention of allowing mechanics and flexibility to undermine the facility's reputation for customer satisfaction and operational excellence. New consultation requirements took effect the following Monday morning, announced through a facility-wide memo that landed on every mechanic's workstation like an unwelcome surprise. Sarah read the directive twice, her military-trained mind immediately recognizing the bureaucratic language designed to sound reasonable while creating operational obstacles. Every maintenance decision that could potentially impact customer operations now required supervisory approval before implementation. The memo emphasized collaborative decision-making and enhanced customer service integration. But Sarah understood the real message. Her authority to make immediate safety decisions was being systematically eroded through procedural requirements that prioritized administrative convenience over operational necessity. The timing wasn't coincidental, coming just days after her meeting with Morrison about the Patterson complaint. Her first test under the new protocols came that same afternoon when she discovered hydraulic fluid seepage in a Beechcraft Bonanza's landing gear system. The leak was minor, but located in a critical area where failure could prevent gear extension during landing. Under normal circumstances, Sarah would have immediately grounded the aircraft pending repair, a decision that required no consultation or administrative approval. Instead, she was now required to document her findings, prepare a detailed report, and schedule a consultation meeting with Morrison before taking any action that might delay the aircraft's planned departure. The owner, a prominent real estate developer named Richard Sterling, had scheduled an important business meeting in Las Vegas that evening and expected his aircraft to be ready for immediate departure. Sarah completed her inspection report with characteristic thoroughness, documenting the location and severity of the hydraulic leak, along with her recommendation for immediate grounding pending repair. The report included photographic evidence, technical specifications, and regulatory citations that supported her assessment. Under federal aviation regulations, the aircraft was clearly unairworthy for flight. Morrison reviewed her findings with obvious discomfort, caught between his mechanic's professional judgment and his superior's emphasis on customer satisfaction. "The leak is very small," he observed, studying the photographs Sarah had taken. "Is there any possibility of deferring the repair until after Sterling's Las Vegas trip?" He specifically requested minimal disruption to his schedule. The question violated every principle of aviation safety that Sarah had learned during her military service. Hydraulic systems were critical flight safety components that demanded immediate attention when defects were identified. The idea of allowing a known hydraulic leak to continue operating, even temporarily, was fundamentally unacceptable from both regulatory and safety perspectives. "Sir, the hydraulic system is essential for landing gear operation," Sarah explained patiently. "Even a minor leak can progress rapidly during flight operations, potentially causing complete system failure at the worst possible moment. Federal regulations require immediate grounding when hydraulic defects are identified." Morrison nodded, but his expression suggested he was searching for alternatives that might satisfy both safety requirements and customer expectations. "What if we increase inspection intervals?" he suggested. "Could we monitor the leak closely and allow limited operations while scheduling repair for next week?" The proposal represented exactly the kind of compromise that Sarah had feared would result from the new consultation protocols. Technical safety decisions were being filtered through administrative concerns that prioritized customer convenience over regulatory compliance. "Sir, a hydraulic leak is not a condition that can be safely monitored during flight operations," Sarah responded firmly. The aircraft must be grounded until repairs are completed and the system is tested for proper operation. There are no regulatory provisions for continued operation with known hydraulic defects. Morrison's frustration was obvious as he realized that no amount of creative interpretation could resolve the conflict between safety requirements and customer expectations. The consultation stretched into early evening as Morrison attempted to contact Harrington for guidance on how to proceed. Sterling had been informed of the delay and was reportedly furious about the impact on his business schedule. His assistant had called twice demanding updates on when the aircraft would be available for departure, and the pressure was mounting for some accommodation that would minimize disruption to his plans. When Harrington finally arrived at the facility, his expression was grim and his tone suggested that he viewed the situation as a failure of customer service rather than a success of safety oversight. This is exactly the kind of inflexibility that creates problems with our most important clients, he announced, reviewing Sarah's documentation with obvious displeasure. Sterling is one of our highest revenue customers, and he specifically requested minimal maintenance delays. There must be some way to accommodate his schedule while addressing the technical concerns. Sarah felt the familiar weight of institutional pressure that she had experienced during her military service when safety concerns conflicted with operational demands. "Sir, federal aviation regulations are clear about hydraulic system defects," she explained. "The aircraft is unairworthy for flight until repairs are completed. There are no provisions for temporary operation with known hydraulic leaks, regardless of customer preferences or business schedules." Harrington's expression suggested that he viewed her adherence to regulations as obstinate rather than professional. "Regulations allow for engineering judgment and flexible interpretation," he countered. "Your role is to find solutions that satisfy both safety requirements and customer needs, not to create obstacles that drive business away from this facility." The conversation was becoming a direct challenge to Sarah's professional judgment and her understanding of regulatory requirements. Morrison watched the exchange with obvious discomfort, clearly torn between supporting his mechanic and satisfying his superior's expectations. The new consultation protocols had created exactly the kind of situation Sarah had feared, where safety decisions became subject to administrative review and customer service considerations. "Sir, I understand the customer service concerns," Sarah said carefully, "but hydraulic system integrity is not negotiable. The aircraft cannot be safely operated with any hydraulic leak, regardless of size or location. My professional judgment and federal regulations both require immediate grounding." Harrington's patience was clearly exhausted as he realized that Sarah would not compromise her safety assessment to accommodate Sterling's schedule. The resolution came in the form of what Harrington called a creative solution that involved bringing in an outside inspector to provide a second opinion on Sarah's findings. The inspector, a retired airline mechanic who frequently worked with the facility on customer service issues, would review the hydraulic leak and determine whether alternative approaches might be appropriate. Sarah watched this development with growing alarm, recognizing it as the beginning of a systematic effort to undermine her professional authority. The idea that safety decisions required second opinions when they inconvenienced important customers represented a fundamental corruption of the maintenance process. Federal regulations were clear about mechanic authority and responsibility, but those regulations were being circumvented through administrative procedures that prioritized customer satisfaction. The outside inspector arrived within an hour, reviewed Sarah's findings, and spent considerable time discussing the situation with Harrington and Morrison. His eventual conclusion was that the hydraulic leak, while technically a defect, might be safely monitored through increased inspection intervals if the customer accepted responsibility for the additional risk. This recommendation violated every principle of aircraft maintenance that Sarah had learned during her military training. Hydraulic systems didn't respect administrative convenience or customer preferences. They failed according to mechanical principles that had nothing to do with business schedules or revenue considerations. The idea of transferring safety responsibility to customers was both legally questionable and ethically unacceptable. When Sterling's aircraft departed that evening with a known hydraulic defect and a waiver signed by the customer, Sarah felt like she was witnessing the corruption of everything she had dedicated her career to protecting. The new consultation protocols had succeeded in their true purpose, which was removing her authority to make immediate safety decisions that might inconvenience important customers. That night, alone in her apartment, Sarah reviewed the federal aviation regulations that governed her responsibilities as a certified mechanic. The language was clear and unambiguous about her authority and obligation to ground aircraft when safety defects were identified. But she was learning that regulations meant nothing when institutional pressure favored customer satisfaction over safety compliance. The pattern was becoming clear. Every safety decision she made would now be subject to administrative review. Customer service considerations and creative solutions that prioritized business relationships over regulatory compliance. Her professional judgment was being systematically undermined through bureaucratic procedures designed to minimize her authority, while maintaining plausible deniability about safety standards. The war between excellence and expediency had begun. And Sarah Martinez was discovering that her enemy wasn't incompetence or ignorance, but a systematic effort to subordinate safety to customer satisfaction. The consultation protocols were just the beginning of something much more dangerous. The systematic campaign against Sarah's credibility began with subtle questions about her judgment that spread through carefully orchestrated conversations among facility management. Harrington had mastered the art of character assassination disguised as professional concern, planting seeds of doubt about Sarah's inflexibility and inability to balance safety with operational requirements during routine staff meetings and informal discussions with key personnel. Within 2 weeks of the Sterling incident, stories began circulating about Sarah's overly cautious approach to maintenance decisions. The narratives were carefully crafted to sound reasonable while undermining confidence in her professional competence. Harrington described her as technically skilled but lacking the business acumen necessary for effective customer service in a competitive aviation environment. Martinez has excellent technical knowledge, he would tell visitors and staff members, but she sometimes struggles with the broader context of her decisions. She focuses so intensely on minor technical details that she loses sight of the operational impact on our clients. The comments were delivered with apparent reluctance, as if Harrington was sharing confidential concerns about an otherwise valued employee. Morrison found himself caught in an increasingly uncomfortable position as Harrington's campaign intensified. During weekly management meetings, he was pressed for examples of Sarah's problematic decision-making and encouraged to document instances where her maintenance recommendations had created customer service issues. The pressure was subtle but persistent, creating an atmosphere where supporting Sarah became increasingly difficult. The documentation requests were particularly insidious because they transformed routine maintenance decisions into evidence of alleged incompetence. Every aircraft grounding, every repair recommendation, every safety concern Sarah raised was now viewed through the lens of customer impact rather than regulatory compliance. Her thoroughness was reframed as obsessiveness, her attention to detail as an inability to prioritize appropriately. Chief Mechanic David Reyes became increasingly uncomfortable as he witnessed the systematic erosion of Sarah's professional standing. During a private conversation in the tool room, he shared his concerns about what he saw happening. "They're building a case against you," he warned quietly, ensuring their conversation couldn't be overheard by other staff members. "What kind of case?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. David's expression was grim as he described the pattern of inquiries he had received from management about Sarah's work performance, her attitude toward customer service, and her willingness to accommodate client schedules when making maintenance decisions. Harrington's been asking leading questions about your military background, David explained. He's suggesting that your Air Force training makes you too rigid for civilian aviation, that you apply military standards inappropriately to civilian operations. The accusation was particularly painful because Sarah's military experience was the foundation of her professional competence and ethical standards. The questions about her military service revealed the sophistication of Harrington's campaign. He understood that her Air Force background was both her greatest strength and potential vulnerability. While her military training provided exceptional technical skills and unwavering commitment to safety protocols, it could also be portrayed as inflexibility when customer service required accommodation and compromise. Senior mechanics throughout the facility were systematically approached for confidential assessments of Sarah's performance and attitude. The interviews were conducted with apparent concern for her professional development, focusing on whether she seemed receptive to feedback about balancing safety requirements with customer service expectations. The questions were designed to elicit criticism while maintaining plausible deniability about their true purpose. Maintenance supervisor Lisa Chun found herself questioned about Sarah's interactions with aircraft owners and her responsiveness to customer concerns. Does Martinez seem to understand the business aspects of our operations? Harrington asked during what was described as a routine performance review discussion. Have you noticed any resistance to the new consultation protocols we implemented? The questions created an atmosphere of suspicion where every interaction with Sarah was potentially being evaluated for evidence of inadequate customer service or resistance to management directives. Chun, who respected Sarah's technical competence and professional integrity, found herself carefully measuring her responses to avoid inadvertently contributing to what she recognized as a character assassination campaign. The pressure on Sarah's colleagues intensified when Harrington began scheduling individual meetings with junior mechanics to discuss their observations about the maintenance department's culture and leadership. These sessions were presented as opportunities for staff input about improving operational efficiency, but the questions consistently focused on Sarah's influence on departmental morale and her attitude toward customer service requirements. 20-3-year-old mechanic Tommy Rodriguez was called into Morrison's office for what was described as a career development discussion, but quickly became an interrogation about Sarah's mentoring style and her comments about the new consultation protocols. Has Martinez expressed any concerns about the changes we've implemented? Morrison asked, his discomfort obvious as he carried out instructions he clearly disagreed with. Tommy, who credited Sarah with teaching him advanced diagnostic techniques and helping him avoid several potentially dangerous mistakes, found himself in an impossible position. Supporting Sarah could damage his own career prospects, but criticizing her would betray someone who had generously shared her expertise and protected him from consequences when he made inevitable rookie errors. She's taught me more about aircraft systems than anyone else here, Tommy replied carefully. Her standards are high, but that's because she takes safety seriously. Morrison pressed for more specific information about Sarah's attitude toward management decisions and her compliance with new procedural requirements. The systematic nature of the campaign became evident when similar conversations were conducted with every member of the maintenance staff. Each interview followed the same pattern: apparent concern for departmental efficiency, followed by specific questions about Sarah's attitude, her influence on other staff members, and her adherence to customer service priorities. Aircraft owners were also subtly encouraged to provide feedback about their interactions with maintenance personnel, with particular attention to whether they felt their business concerns were adequately considered during aircraft inspections. The feedback requests were presented as part of a customer service improvement initiative, but they consistently directed attention toward evaluating individual mechanics rather than systemic issues. The psychological pressure on Sarah intensified. When she discovered that her maintenance decisions were being routinely second-guessed through additional inspections and external consultations, aircraft she had approved for flight were subjected to redundant examinations, while planes she had grounded were reviewed by outside inspectors who seemed predisposed to find alternative solutions that accommodated customer schedules. The pattern of additional scrutiny served multiple purposes in Harrington's campaign. It created doubt about Sarah's competence while generating documentation that could be used to support allegations of inconsistent or overly conservative maintenance practices. Every instance where an outside inspector reached different conclusions became evidence of Sarah's alleged inflexibility or poor judgment. The most damaging aspect of the campaign was how it transformed Sarah's greatest professional strengths into apparent weaknesses. Her meticulous documentation became evidence of bureaucratic obsessiveness. Her unwavering adherence to safety protocols was reframed as inability to exercise appropriate judgment. Her military precision was characterized as inflexibility, inappropriate for civilian operations. Harrington's strategy was particularly effective because it avoided direct accusations that could be challenged or refuted. Instead, it created an atmosphere of constant questioning and evaluation that gradually eroded confidence in Sarah's professional judgment. The campaign operated through implication and suggestion, making it difficult to identify specific instances of misconduct while systematically destroying her credibility. The psychological toll of constant scrutiny began affecting Sarah's confidence and job performance. She found herself second-guessing decisions that should have been routine, documenting every action in excessive detail to protect against potential criticism, and spending additional time reviewing work that had always met the highest professional standards. The isolation was perhaps the most painful aspect of the campaign. Colleagues who had previously sought her expertise and valued her mentoring began maintaining careful distance to avoid being associated with someone who was clearly under management scrutiny. The professional relationships that had made her work meaningful were being systematically destroyed through fear and administrative pressure. As Sarah sat in her apartment that evening, reviewing maintenance manuals and questioning decisions she had made with complete confidence just months earlier, she realized that Harrington's campaign was succeeding. Her professional identity was being systematically dismantled through bureaucratic warfare that left her feeling isolated, doubt-ridden, and increasingly vulnerable to the false accusations she knew were coming. The enemy had never been customer service or operational efficiency. It had always been the threat that competence posed to mediocrity, the danger that excellence represented to those who profited from lowered standards. Sarah Martinez was about to discover that integrity was not just undervalued in civilian aviation. It was actively targeted for destruction. The isolation began gradually, as colleagues who had once sought Sarah's expertise started maintaining careful distance from someone who had clearly become a liability in the facility's political landscape. During morning briefings, the easy camaraderie that had characterized her relationships with other mechanics was replaced by polite but distant interactions that spoke volumes about the effectiveness of Harrington's campaign against her credibility. Tommy Rodriguez, the young mechanic Sarah had mentored for over a year, now avoided making eye contact during shift changes and limited their conversations to basic operational necessities. The transformation was particularly painful because Sarah had invested considerable time helping him develop advanced diagnostic skills and navigate the complex social dynamics of the maintenance facility. His sudden withdrawal felt like a personal betrayal, even though she understood the professional pressures he faced. David Reyes, who had been one of Sarah's strongest supporters and closest allies, found himself increasingly isolated as well. When he attempted to defend her professional competence during informal discussions with other staff members, his colleagues politely changed subjects when he praised Sarah's technical abilities or questioned the fairness of the additional scrutiny she was receiving. The message was clear: Association with Sarah Martinez had become professionally dangerous. The systematic removal of her support network was orchestrated through carefully managed personnel assignments that separated her from potential allies while surrounding her with mechanics who were either neutral or subtly hostile to her presence. Morrison began scheduling her for shifts that minimized interaction with senior staff members who might question the treatment she was receiving or provide testimony about her professional competence. Sarah's work assignments were gradually shifted toward less visible maintenance tasks that reduced her interaction with aircraft owners and limited her authority to make high-impact safety decisions. Instead of conducting complex engine inspections or avionics diagnostics that showcased her expertise, she was relegated to routine cleaning, basic servicing, and preliminary checks that could be easily supervised and second-guessed by management. Professional isolation was compounded by social exclusion that made her feel like an outsider in the facility she had called home for 18 months. Lunch conversations stopped when she approached. Coffee break discussions dissolved when she entered the break room. And after-work gatherings that had once included her were now conducted without invitation or notification. Her colleagues weren't deliberately cruel, but their caution was unmistakable. Lisa Chun, the maintenance supervisor who had always respected Sarah's technical competence, began treating her with formal politeness that replaced their previous collegial relationship. Chun's change in attitude was particularly significant because she represented the kind of experienced professional whose support could have validated Sarah's claims about the unfair treatment she was receiving. "Martinez, I need you to focus on the Cessna 150 annual inspection," Chun announced during a morning assignment meeting, her tone carefully neutral. The aircraft was a simple trainer with basic systems that required minimal expertise to inspect, a far cry from the complex corporate jets and high-performance aircraft Sarah had previously been assigned to maintain. The assignment felt like punishment, disguised as routine task distribution. Sarah's expertise in advanced avionics, turbine engines, and complex hydraulic systems was being deliberately underutilized in favor of work that any entry-level mechanic could perform competently. The message was clear. Her knowledge and experience were no longer valued or trusted by facility management. During the Cessna inspection, Sarah worked in solitude while other mechanics collaborated on more challenging projects nearby. Their conversations about technical problems and creative solutions served as painful reminders of the professional community she was being systematically excluded from. The isolation was designed to be psychologically crushing while remaining technically defensible as routine work assignment. The administrative burden placed on Sarah increased dramatically as every aspect of her work became subject to additional documentation and review requirements. Simple maintenance tasks that had previously required basic logbook entries now demanded detailed reports, photographic evidence, and supervisory approval at multiple stages of completion. The extra paperwork consumed hours of her time while serving no legitimate operational purpose. Morrison appeared in the hangar during Sarah's afternoon break, his expression uncomfortable as he carried out what were clearly instructions from higher authority. "Sarah, I need to discuss some concerns that have been raised about your work performance," he began, his voice lacking conviction. The conversation felt scripted, as if he was reciting talking points rather than expressing genuine concerns. "What specific concerns?" Sarah asked, though she suspected the accusations would be vague enough to be difficult to refute, while serious enough to justify further restrictions on her authority. Morrison consulted a folder that contained what appeared to be a comprehensive compilation of alleged performance issues. "There have been questions about your responsiveness to customer service requirements," he read carefully. "Some staff members have expressed concerns about your attitude toward the new consultation protocols, and there have been suggestions that your approach to maintenance decisions may be overly conservative for our operational environment." The allegations were masterfully crafted to sound serious, while remaining impossible to prove or disprove through objective evidence. Customer service requirements were subjective, attitude concerns were matters of interpretation, and maintenance conservatism could be characterized as either admirable caution or problematic. Inflexibility depending on the evaluator's perspective. Sarah listened to the litany of vague accusations while recognizing the sophisticated nature of the campaign being waged against her. Each allegation was designed to erode confidence in her professional judgment, while avoiding specific claims that could be challenged through documentation or witness testimony. The strategy was to create an overall impression of incompetence without providing clear evidence that could be refuted. "Sir, I'd like to review the specific incidents that support these concerns," Sarah requested, knowing that specificity was exactly what Harrington's campaign was designed to avoid. Morrison's discomfort was obvious as he explained that the concerns were based on general observations and staff feedback rather than documented incidents that could be independently verified. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The meeting concluded with Morrison informing Sarah that she would be subject to enhanced supervision pending resolution of the performance concerns. This meant that every significant decision she made would require prior approval from management, effectively removing her authority to respond immediately to safety issues or aircraft defects that required urgent attention. The enhanced supervision protocol represented the culmination of the isolation strategy. Sarah was being transformed from a trusted professional into a suspected liability, who required constant oversight and could not be relied upon to make independent judgments about aircraft safety or maintenance priorities. The psychological impact was devastating, undermining her confidence and professional identity. That evening, Sarah called her former squadron commander, Colonel Patricia Walsh, who had remained a mentor and friend since her medical discharge from the Air Force. The conversation was difficult because Sarah had to explain how civilian aviation had proved more politically treacherous than military service, where excellence was generally protected rather than persecuted. "They're destroying my credibility through administrative warfare," Sarah explained, her voice carrying the frustration and bewilderment of someone who had always believed that competence would be rewarded rather than punished. "Every safety decision I make is being questioned, every procedure I follow is being scrutinized, and every colleague I trusted is being pressured to distance themselves from me." Colonel Walsh listened with the understanding of someone who had witnessed similar campaigns during her own military career. "It sounds like someone views your competence as a threat to their authority," she observed. "The question is whether you're willing to fight back or whether you'll let them win through attrition and psychological pressure." The suggestion of fighting back seemed almost impossible given the isolation Sarah was experiencing. Her support network had been systematically dismantled. Her professional reputation was being demolished through carefully orchestrated allegations, and her authority to make safety decisions had been effectively removed through administrative procedures. As she sat in her apartment that night, surrounded by aviation textbooks and military commendations that seemed increasingly irrelevant to her current situation, Sarah realized that the isolation was designed to make her feel powerless and alone. The strategy was to convince her that resistance was futile and that acceptance of diminished status was her only option for remaining employed. But Sarah Martinez had survived military training, combat deployments, and a career-ending injury without surrendering her integrity. The civilian aviation industry was about to discover that isolating a veteran was different from defeating one, and that competence under pressure was exactly what her military training had prepared her to demonstrate. The storm was intensifying. But Sarah Martinez was not broken yet. The formal termination meeting was scheduled for a Friday afternoon, deliberately timed to minimize disruption to facility operations and reduce the likelihood of staff members witnessing Sarah's final humiliation. Harrington had orchestrated the timing with calculated precision, ensuring that her dismissal would occur during the weekend shift change when most of the regular maintenance staff would be unavailable to observe the proceedings or offer support. Morrison delivered the notification with obvious reluctance, his voice strained as he carried out instructions that clearly violated his personal sense of justice. "Sarah, you're required to report to the conference room at 1400 hours for a disciplinary meeting with Director Harrington and Human Resources. Please bring your facility identification, security badges, and any company property in your possession." The clinical language couldn't disguise the finality of what was happening. Sarah recognized the terminology from her military experience, where similar meetings preceded administrative actions that ended careers and destroyed professional reputations. The request to bring identification and security badges was standard protocol for personnel being separated from their positions, regardless of the circumstances that led to their dismissal. During the hours leading up to the meeting, Sarah methodically completed her assigned maintenance tasks with the same attention to detail that had characterized her entire career. She documented every procedure, filed every report, and ensured that aircraft under her responsibility were properly secured and logged. If this was to be her final day at the facility, she would leave with the same professionalism that had defined her service. David Reyes found her in the tool room, organizing equipment with unusual care while clearly preparing for what they both understood would be her last shift. His expression was grim as he watched her work, knowing that one of the facility's most competent mechanics was about to be sacrificed to protect Harrington's customer service philosophy and Morrison's career advancement prospects. "This is wrong," he said quietly, ensuring their conversation couldn't be overheard by other staff members. "Everyone knows this is wrong. You're the best mechanic we have, and they're destroying you because you won't compromise safety standards to make wealthy customers happy." Sarah appreciated his support, but she also understood the futility of protesting institutional decisions that had already been finalized through administrative processes. "The system protects itself," she replied, her voice carrying the resignation of someone who had learned that excellence could become a liability when it threatened established hierarchies. "Harrington needs a scapegoat for the customer complaints. And I'm convenient because I refuse to compromise on safety issues." David's frustration was obvious as he witnessed the systematic destruction of professional integrity in service of political expediency. The conference room was arranged like a tribunal when Sarah arrived precisely on time. Her military training, ensuring punctuality even in circumstances that would determine her professional future. Harrington sat at the head of the table with Human Resources Director Jennifer Martinez flanking him, their expressions professionally neutral but clearly prepared for an unpleasant conversation. "Sit down, Martinez," Harrington began without preamble, his tone carrying the authority of someone who had already decided the outcome before the meeting began. "We're here to discuss serious concerns about your performance and your fit within our organization's culture and operational philosophy." The language was carefully chosen to suggest that the decision was based on objective evaluation rather than personal vendetta. Sarah maintained military bearing as she listened to Harrington present his case against her continued employment. The allegations were comprehensive and damning: resistance to management directives, inability to balance safety requirements with customer service expectations, negative impact on departmental morale, and failure to adapt to new consultation protocols designed to improve operational efficiency. Each accusation was supported by carefully selected documentation that portrayed her safety consciousness as inflexibility and her regulatory compliance as customer service failure. The Patterson incident was described as an example of her inability to consider business implications when making maintenance decisions. The Sterling situation was characterized as evidence of her unwillingness to find creative solutions that satisfied both safety requirements and client needs. Your military background may have served you well in Air Force operations. Harrington continued, but civilian aviation requires different skills and priorities. Our clients expect accommodation and flexibility that goes beyond rigid adherence to technical procedures. The criticism of her military service was particularly painful because it attacked the foundation of her professional identity and ethical standards. Human Resources Director Martinez presented the formal documentation of Sarah's termination, explaining that she was being dismissed for performance issues related to customer service delivery and cultural fit within the organization. The language was deliberately vague to avoid specific allegations that might be legally challenged, while providing sufficient justification for immediate separation. You have the right to appeal this decision through established grievance procedures, Martinez explained, though her tone suggested that such appeals were rarely successful and generally inadvisable for employees seeking future employment references. However, if you accept the termination without challenge, your personnel file will reflect resignation for personal reasons rather than dismissal for cause. The offer was clearly designed to discourage legal action while protecting the facility from potential wrongful termination claims. Sarah understood that accepting the resignation option would preserve her professional reputation for future employment opportunities, while fighting the decision would likely result in negative references that could damage her career prospects throughout the aviation industry. I want to state for the record that I have never compromised safety standards or violated federal aviation regulations, Sarah declared, her voice steady despite the emotional turmoil she was experiencing. Every decision I made was based on regulatory requirements and professional judgment designed to protect aircraft safety and prevent accidents. Harrington's expression suggested that her statement was irrelevant to the business considerations that had driven his decision. Safety is important, he acknowledged dismissively, but so is maintaining positive relationships with clients who keep this facility profitable. Your inability to balance these priorities made your continued employment untenable. The response revealed the fundamental philosophical difference that had made conflict inevitable from the beginning. The meeting concluded with Sarah surrendering her identification badges, facility keys, and security access cards while signing paperwork that officially ended her employment at the General Aviation Facility. The administrative process was conducted with bureaucratic efficiency that stripped away 18 months of professional relationships and career development in a matter of minutes. As she gathered her personal belongings from her locker, Sarah was approached by several colleagues who offered quiet words of support and encouragement. Their expressions reflected a mixture of sympathy, anger, and fear about what her dismissal might mean for their own job security if they ever found themselves in conflict with management priorities. Tommy Rodriguez, the young mechanic she had mentored, looked embarrassed as he helped her carry boxes to her car. "Ma'am, I'm sorry about what happened," he said quietly. "You taught me more about aircraft maintenance than anyone else here. I won't forget what you showed me about doing the job right." Sarah appreciated his words, but she also understood that his career survival depended on avoiding association with her example. The drive home felt surreal as Sarah processed the reality of her situation. 6 months earlier, she had been one of the facility's most respected mechanics, trusted with complex maintenance decisions and valued for her expertise. Now she was unemployed, her professional reputation damaged by carefully orchestrated allegations, and her future in aviation uncertain. That evening, alone in her apartment with cardboard boxes containing the remnants of her civilian aviation career, Sarah reflected on the parallels between her military medical discharge and her civilian termination. Both had ended careers she loved for reasons beyond her control, but this dismissal felt different because it was based on deliberate persecution rather than unfortunate circumstances. Her phone buzzed with a text message from David Reyes. "They can fire you, but they can't change what you are. Everyone who matters knows the truth." The support was appreciated, But Sarah understood that truth had proved insufficient to protect her when it conflicted with institutional priorities and customer service requirements. Harrington had achieved his objective of removing the mechanic whose competence had created customer relations problems and whose integrity had threatened his vision of accommodation-based aviation maintenance. The facility would now operate according to principles that prioritized client satisfaction over regulatory compliance, with mechanics who understood that their job security depended on flexibility rather than technical excellence. Sarah Martinez's career at Phoenix Sky Harbor's General Aviation Terminal was over, destroyed by the same commitment to excellence that had defined her military service. The system had protected itself by eliminating the threat that competence posed to mediocrity, leaving her to contemplate an uncertain future in an industry that seemed increasingly hostile to the values she had always believed were fundamental to aviation safety. The false victory was complete, and Sarah Martinez appeared to be finished. The emergency call came through Phoenix Approach Control at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, cutting through routine air traffic chatter with the sharp urgency that made every controller's blood run cold. Flight instructor Jake Peterson's voice crackled over the radio frequency, strained with panic as he described a situation that was every pilot's worst nightmare. Phoenix Approach, Cessna 4827 Delta, declaring emergency. Student pilot unconscious. Controls unresponsive, aircraft in descending spiral at 4,000 feet. I need immediate assistance. The transmission carried the terror of someone who understood exactly how rapidly their situation was deteriorating, with precious seconds ticking away before impact became inevitable. Air traffic controller Maria Santos immediately began coordinating emergency response procedures while attempting to establish communication with the aircraft. The Cessna 172 was carrying a student pilot who had suffered an apparent medical emergency during a routine training flight, leaving Peterson unable to regain control from the right seat due to mechanical complications that had jammed the dual controls in a configuration that prevented instructor intervention. Cessna 4827 Delta, can you regain control of the aircraft? Santos transmitted, though the increasingly erratic radar track suggested that Peterson was fighting a losing battle against mechanical failure and pilot incapacitation. The aircraft was entering a steepening spiral that would result in ground impact within minutes unless someone could provide immediate assistance. On the facility's tarmac, Sarah Martinez was loading her final personal belongings into her car when the emergency radio chatter began broadcasting over the facility's general frequency. Her termination was effective immediately, but she had remained on the property to retrieve tools and personal items from her work area while saying goodbye to colleagues who were willing to risk association with her. The radio traffic immediately captured her attention because emergency procedures had been central to her Air Force training, where rapid response to aircraft emergencies was considered fundamental to mission success. As she listened to the developing crisis, her military instincts automatically began analyzing the situation and considering potential solutions. David Reyes emerged from the maintenance hangar, his expression grim as he recognized the severity of what they were hearing. "That's Peterson's voice," he told Sarah quietly. "He's one of the best instructors at the flight school, but if he can't regain control, that aircraft is going down." The implications were clear. Experienced instructors didn't declare emergencies unless their situation was genuinely desperate. Phoenix Approach Control was frantically coordinating with emergency services while attempting to guide Peterson through emergency procedures that might restore aircraft control or at least reduce the severity of the inevitable impact. Fire trucks and ambulances were being dispatched to the projected crash site, a residential area southwest of the airport where hundreds of people could become casualties if the aircraft couldn't be diverted. Cessna 4827 Delta, try reducing power and applying opposite rudder, Santos transmitted, following standard emergency procedures for recovering from spiraled IVs. But Peterson's response indicated that normal control inputs were ineffective due to the mechanical complications that had developed when the student pilot's medical emergency caused violent control movements that damaged the aircraft's control linkages. Sarah found herself unconsciously analyzing the emergency from a maintenance perspective, her mind automatically cataloging the potential mechanical failures that could prevent instructor intervention while considering alternative solutions that might not be apparent to flight operations personnel. Her military training had included extensive emergency response procedures that went beyond routine pilot techniques. Morrison appeared from the administrative offices, clearly aware of the emergency situation and the facility's proximity to the projected impact area. His expression was troubled as he realized that one of their tenant flight schools was experiencing a potentially catastrophic emergency that could result in multiple fatalities and significant facility damage if the aircraft couldn't be diverted away from populated areas. "Is there anything we can do to help?" Morrison asked Santos over the facility radio, though standard procedures limited ground assistance to emergency coordination rather than direct intervention. The aircraft was beyond the range where ground-based assistance could be effective, and standard emergency protocols had apparently failed to resolve the control problems. Sarah's attention was drawn to a small detail that others had missed. The emergency aircraft's registration number matched a Cessna 172 she had recently inspected. During her tenure at the facility, her maintenance records showed that aircraft had experienced intermittent control cable tensions that she had documented and recommended for immediate attention. But the repairs had been deferred due to customer cost concerns and operational scheduling priorities. The mechanical knowledge Sarah possessed about that specific aircraft suddenly became critically relevant to the emergency situation. She understood the control system weaknesses that could have contributed to the current crisis, and more importantly, she knew potential workarounds that might restore partial control, even with damaged linkages that prevented normal instructor intervention. "I know that aircraft," Sarah told Morrison urgently. "I inspected it 3 weeks ago and found control cable issues that were deferred pending owner approval. There might be alternative control methods that Peterson doesn't know about." Morrison's expression reflected the conflict between his recent termination of Sarah and the potential value of her technical knowledge in a life-threatening emergency. Without waiting for administrative approval that might consume precious seconds while the aircraft continued its deadly descent, Sarah approached the facility radio and transmitted directly to Phoenix Approach Control. "Phoenix Approach, this is Sarah Martinez at Sky Harbor General Aviation. I have specific mechanical knowledge about Cessna 4827 Delta that might assist with emergency recovery." Santos immediately recognized the potential value of technical expertise during aircraft emergencies, where mechanical knowledge could provide solutions that weren't available through standard flight procedures. "Sky Harbor, go ahead with your information," she responded, bypassing normal protocol restrictions in favor of any assistance that might prevent the impending tragedy. "The aircraft has a history of control cable binding near the rudder pedal assembly," Sarah transmitted, drawing on her detailed maintenance records and mechanical understanding of the specific aircraft. "If normal controls are ineffective, the pilot might be able to restore partial control by manually manipulating the cable tensions through the inspection panel behind the rear seats." Peterson's voice crackled over the radio with renewed hope as he absorbed Sarah's technical information. "Sky Harbor, can you provide specific instructions for accessing those cable controls?" The desperation in his transmission was obvious as he prepared to attempt procedures that were far outside normal pilot training, but might represent his only chance of preventing ground impact. Sarah's military training had included extensive instruction on emergency field repairs and alternative control methods that could restore aircraft functionality under combat conditions. Those techniques, while unconventional, were exactly what the current situation required when normal procedures had failed and time was running out. Peterson, you need to access the inspection panel 18 inches behind the rear seat. Sarah transmitted, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone providing life-saving technical assistance. Inside you'll find 3 control cables with adjustment points that can restore rudder authority even if the primary linkages are damaged. The radio fell silent except for the sound of Peterson struggling with controls and attempting to reach the emergency access panel while maintaining some level of aircraft control. Every second of silence increased the tension as ground observers realized that the success or failure of Sarah's technical guidance would determine whether the aircraft could recover from its death spiral. Morrison watched in amazement as Sarah calmly provided technical assistance that could save multiple lives while demonstrating exactly the kind of expertise and professional competence that his facility had just terminated. The irony was inescapable. The mechanic they had dismissed for being overly focused on safety concerns was now the only person who could prevent a tragedy. Fire trucks raced toward the projected crash site, while emergency responders prepared for the worst-case scenario. But everyone involved understood that ground-based rescue efforts would be meaningless if the aircraft couldn't regain control before impact. Sarah Martinez's technical knowledge had become the last hope for preventing a disaster that would claim multiple lives and devastate an entire community. The radio crackled with Peterson's voice as he attempted to implement Sarah's emergency procedures while fighting against time, gravity, and mechanical failure. The next few seconds would determine whether competence could triumph over crisis, whether technical expertise could overcome institutional prejudice, and whether Sarah Martinez's career destruction would be followed by her vindication. "I've got partial rudder control." Peterson's voice crackled through the radio with desperate relief as Sarah's emergency procedures began taking effect. The Cessna's deadly spiral was slowly transforming into a controllable descent, though the aircraft remained dangerously unstable and far from safe. "Sky Harbor, I need continued guidance. The student is still unconscious, and I'm fighting severe control limitations." Sarah maintained her position at the facility radio, her military training taking over as she processed the developing situation with tactical precision. The aircraft was no longer in immediate danger of ground impact, but Peterson faced the complex challenge of landing a damaged aircraft with an incapacitated student pilot while operating through emergency control procedures that required constant manual adjustment. "Peterson, what's your current altitude and heading?" Sarah transmitted, gathering the information she needed to guide him through the approach phase of what would be one of the most challenging landings in civilian aviation history. Her voice carried the calm authority of someone who had dealt with aircraft emergencies under combat conditions, where technical competence literally meant the difference between life and death. Phoenix approach control had cleared all traffic from the surrounding airspace, creating a sterile environment where Peterson could attempt an emergency landing without the additional complication of avoiding other aircraft. Fire trucks and emergency medical personnel were positioning themselves along the runway while air traffic controllers coordinated with hospital facilities to ensure immediate medical attention for the unconscious student pilot. Morrison stood beside Sarah, his expression a mixture of amazement and growing realization that he had just terminated the one person at the facility who possessed the specific technical knowledge necessary to prevent a major aviation disaster. The irony was devastating. The mechanic they had dismissed for being overly focused on safety concerns was now demonstrating exactly why such focus was essential. "Altitude 2,000 feet, heading 270. Peterson responded, his voice strained with the effort of maintaining aircraft control through improvised procedures while monitoring his unconscious student. "The manual cable adjustments are working, but I need constant input to maintain level flight. This is going to be a very challenging approach." Sarah consulted her mental database of aircraft performance characteristics and emergency landing procedures. Drawing on both her military experience and her detailed knowledge of the specific Cessna model Peterson was flying. Peterson, reduce power to 1500 RPM and trim for 90 knots. The manual control inputs will be more effective at lower airspeeds, but you'll need to be prepared for rapid corrections during the approach. David Reyes had joined the growing crowd of facility personnel who were monitoring the emergency radio traffic, all of them recognizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The mechanic they had watched being systematically destroyed by administrative persecution was now calmly providing life-saving technical assistance that demonstrated her exceptional competence and professional value. Air Traffic Controller Santos coordinated with emergency services while maintaining communication with Peterson. But everyone involved understood that Sarah's technical guidance was the critical factor determining whether the emergency would end in tragedy or successful recovery. Standard air traffic control procedures provided framework and support, but the specific mechanical knowledge required for this situation existed only in Sarah's experience and training. Sky Harbor, I'm beginning my approach to runway 26. Peterson transmitted, his voice reflecting the intense concentration required to manage an approach with severely compromised aircraft controls. Student pilot remains unconscious, but vital signs appear stable. I'm committed to landing at Sky Harbor due to control limitations that make alternate airports impossible. Sarah's military training had included extensive instruction on emergency landing procedures under combat conditions, where aircraft damage and system failures created situations that required creative solutions rather than textbook procedures. Those techniques were directly applicable to Peterson's current situation, where normal landing protocols were impossible due to the control system damage. Peterson, maintain current heading until 3 miles from the runway. Then begin a gentle left turn using rudder inputs coordinated with power changes. Sarah transmitted, providing guidance that accounted for the aircraft's specific control limitations. The manual cable adjustments will require more aggressive inputs during the turn, but don't overcorrect or you'll lose what control authority you have. Tommy Rodriguez, the young mechanic Sarah had mentored before her termination, watched the emergency unfold with growing admiration for the professional competence she had always displayed. She knows exactly what to do, he whispered to his colleague. Look how calm she is, how precise her instructions are. They fired the best mechanic we had. The emergency was drawing attention from throughout the Phoenix aviation community as word spread about the dramatic situation developing at Sky Harbor. Other facilities were monitoring the radio traffic, emergency responders were coordinating resources, and aviation professionals were recognizing that they were witnessing an exceptional demonstration of technical expertise under extreme pressure. Morrison found himself documenting the emergency response procedures, partly for official records, but mainly because he was beginning to understand the magnitude of the mistake the facility had made in terminating Sarah Martinez. Her calm competence under pressure was exactly the kind of leadership and technical skill that the facility needed, not the liability that Harrington had portrayed her to be. 2 miles from runway threshold, Peterson reported, his voice tight, with concentration as he managed the complex approach while monitoring his unconscious student pilot. Manual controls are requiring constant adjustment, but I'm maintaining approach path. Request emergency vehicles standing by for immediate medical attention upon landing. Sarah's guidance continued as she walked Peterson through the final approach phase, providing specific technical instructions that accounted for the aircraft's control limitations while ensuring the safest possible landing configuration. Her voice remained steady and professional despite the enormous pressure of knowing that multiple lives depended on the accuracy of her technical guidance. The facility's radio fell silent except for the sound of Peterson's heavy breathing as he concentrated on the final approach, manually adjusting control cables while managing throttle and trim inputs. through procedures that no flight instructor had ever been trained to perform. Every person monitoring the emergency understood that the next few minutes would determine whether the situation ended in triumph or tragedy. Fire trucks were positioned along the runway, with crews prepared for immediate response, while ambulances waited to provide medical attention for the unconscious student pilot. The entire emergency response was coordinated around the assumption that Peterson would successfully land the aircraft, largely because everyone involved had confidence in Sarah's technical guidance and professional competence. Lisa Chun, the maintenance supervisor who had been pressured to distance herself from Sarah during the persecution campaign, watched the emergency response with growing shame about her failure to support someone whose competence was now being demonstrated under the most demanding circumstances possible. "We all knew she was exceptional," she admitted quietly. "We should have protected her instead of letting them destroy her." The radar track showed Peterson's aircraft maintaining approach path despite the control difficulties he was experiencing, testament to both his piloting skills and the effectiveness of Sarah's emergency procedures. The combination of professional competence under pressure was creating a successful outcome that seemed impossible just minutes earlier, when the aircraft was in an unrecoverable spiral dive. "1 mile final, runway in sight," Peterson transmitted, his voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had been fighting for control while following complex emergency procedures. "Student pilot's condition unchanged, but aircraft is stable on approach. Preparing for landing with emergency procedures active." Sarah continued providing guidance through the final approach phase, her technical expertise and calm professionalism creating the conditions for what would become one of the most remarkable emergency landings in civilian aviation history. The mechanic who had been terminated for excessive attention to safety concerns was now demonstrating exactly why such attention was essential for preventing tragedies and protecting lives. The facility personnel who had witnessed her persecution were beginning to understand the magnitude of the injustice that had been committed against someone whose competence was now saving lives while vindicating every principle she had refused to compromise. Excellence was triumphing over adversity. Technical skill was overcoming institutional prejudice, and Sarah Martinez was proving that integrity under pressure was exactly what aviation safety required. The Cessna's wheels touched the runway with a jarring impact that sent shockwaves through the aircraft's damaged structure. But Peterson had successfully guided the crippled plane to Earth through Sarah's expert technical assistance. Emergency vehicles raced alongside the aircraft as it rolled down the center line, their crews prepared for immediate response while Peterson fought to maintain directional control through the manual cable adjustments that had saved their lives. Aircraft on deck, emergency vehicles responding. Air Traffic Controller Santos announced over the facility frequency, her voice carrying the relief of someone who had witnessed what seemed impossible just minutes earlier. The unconscious student pilot was rushed to emergency medical care while Peterson staggered from the cockpit, his hands trembling from the physical and emotional strain of the most challenging landing he had ever attempted. Within hours, the aviation community was buzzing with accounts of the extraordinary emergency that had been resolved through the technical expertise of a recently terminated mechanic whose knowledge had proved invaluable when standard procedures failed. The story spread through professional networks, online forums, and industry publications as aviation professionals recognized the significance of what had occurred at Phoenix Sky Harbor. Federal Aviation Administration investigators arrived at the facility that evening to begin their mandatory investigation of the emergency, but their preliminary findings immediately vindicated Sarah's technical assessment of the aircraft's control system problems. The cable binding issue she had documented 3 weeks earlier had indeed contributed to the emergency, while her recommended repairs could have prevented the entire crisis if they had been implemented when originally identified. Lead investigator Captain James Morrison, no relation to the facility supervisor, reviewed Sarah's maintenance records with growing admiration for their thoroughness and accuracy. This mechanic identified the exact problem that caused today's emergency, he told facility management during his preliminary briefing. Her documentation shows she recommended immediate repair of the control cable binding, which would have prevented the control failure that made instructor intervention impossible. The investigators' findings created immediate problems for Harrington's narrative about Sarah's alleged incompetence and poor judgment. Her maintenance records demonstrated exceptional technical competence, while her emergency assistance had prevented what could have been a catastrophic accident with multiple fatalities. The mechanic they had terminated for being overly cautious had proved that such caution was exactly what aviation safety required. Morrison, the facility supervisor, found himself in an impossible position as the investigation revealed the accuracy of Sarah's technical assessments and the value of her conservative approach to aircraft maintenance. His cooperation with Harrington's persecution campaign was now exposed as a serious error in judgment that had nearly resulted in preventable deaths. Phoenix television stations picked up the story within 24 hours, drawn by the dramatic elements of the emergency landing and the compelling human interest angle of a terminated mechanic whose expertise had saved lives. Reporter Jennifer Walsh conducted interviews with Peterson, emergency responders, and aviation professionals who emphasized the exceptional nature of Sarah's technical assistance under extreme pressure. Without her knowledge of that specific aircraft's control systems, we would have lost the airplane and potentially caused casualties on the ground, Peterson told the television cameras, his voice still shaky from the previous day's trauma. Sarah Martinez saved our lives through her technical expertise and professional competence. The aviation community owes her a tremendous debt of gratitude. The media coverage created public pressure that extended far beyond the aviation industry. As viewers learned about the persecution Sarah had endured despite her exceptional professional competence, editorial writers, aviation safety advocates, and professional organizations began questioning how such talent could be systematically destroyed while inferior alternatives were protected by institutional politics. Regional FAA Administrator Patricia Brennan contacted the facility directly to commend Sarah's emergency assistance while requesting a comprehensive review of the personnel decisions that had led to her termination. Mechanic Martinez demonstrated exactly the kind of technical expertise and professional judgment that aviation safety depends on, she stated officially. Her termination raises serious questions about this facility's commitment to maintaining the highest safety standards. The FAA review created immediate legal and regulatory problems for Harrington's administration as investigators examined the systematic campaign that had been waged against one of the facility's most competent mechanics. Federal aviation regulations required facilities to maintain staff with appropriate technical qualifications, and Sarah's termination could be interpreted as compromising safety standards for non-technical reasons. Tommy Rodriguez, the young mechanic Sarah had mentored, found the courage to contact the FAA investigators with information about the persecution campaign he had witnessed. They pressured all of us to say negative things about her, he testified. Management wanted complaints about her work performance, but everyone knew she was the best mechanic we had. They were destroying her reputation because she wouldn't compromise on safety issues. Similar testimonies from other facility staff members created a comprehensive picture of the systematic character assassination that had preceded Sarah's termination. The investigators' report documented how technical competence had been reframed as inflexibility, safety consciousness had been portrayed as poor customer service, and regulatory compliance had been characterized as resistance to management directives. David Reyes provided detailed testimony about the pressure campaign that had isolated Sarah from her colleagues and undermined her professional authority. They made it clear that supporting her was career suicide, he explained to investigators. Everyone knew she was being railroaded, But we were afraid to speak up because we saw what happened to people who defended her. The investigation revealed that Harrington's customer service philosophy had systematically prioritized client satisfaction over regulatory compliance, creating an environment where safety concerns were viewed as obstacles to profitable operations rather than essential protections against catastrophic accidents. Sarah's termination was the logical conclusion of policies that treated technical expertise as a liability when it interfered with customer convenience. Lisa Chun's testimony was particularly damaging to Harrington's position because she provided detailed documentation of the administrative pressure that had been applied to manufacture complaints against Sarah's performance. "We were told to find problems with her work even when no problems existed," she admitted. Management wanted documentation to justify their decision to terminate her, regardless of her actual competence. Aircraft owner Thomas Patterson, whose complaints had initiated the persecution campaign, found himself under federal investigation as authorities examined whether his influence had compromised safety standards at the facility. His construction company faced potential liability issues if investigators determined that his pressure on facility management had contributed to unsafe maintenance practices. The broader aviation community rallied around Sarah as professional. Organizations, pilot associations, and maintenance unions expressed outrage about the treatment she had received. The Aircraft Mechanics Fraternal Association issued a statement condemning the systematic persecution of a mechanic whose only crime was refusing to compromise safety standards for customer convenience. Corporate aircraft operators who had relied on Sarah's expertise during her tenure at the facility began requesting transfers to other maintenance providers, concerned that the facility's management philosophy might compromise the safety of their expensive aircraft and valuable personnel. The customer base that Harrington had been so eager to please was now questioning whether the facility could provide adequate maintenance services. Regional Aviation publications featured detailed articles about the case, using Sarah's persecution as an example of the dangers posed when business considerations override safety protocols. Industry experts warned that similar situations were likely occurring throughout civilian aviation, where customer service pressures could create incentives to minimize maintenance requirements and expedite aircraft approvals. Professional pilot organizations began advocating for stronger protections for mechanics who identified safety defects that might inconvenience aircraft owners. Sarah's case demonstrated the vulnerability of maintenance personnel who lacked the institutional protections available to pilots through union representation and federal whistleblower statutes. The Federal Aviation Administration announced a comprehensive review of maintenance facilities throughout the region, triggered by concerns that Sarah's experience might represent a broader pattern of safety compromise disguised as customer service improvement. The investigation would examine whether other facilities were allowing business considerations to influence technical maintenance decisions. Sarah herself remained quietly professional throughout the media attention and federal investigation, focusing on the technical aspects of the emergency rather than the personal vindication her assistance had provided. Her dignity under pressure impressed investigators, reporters, and aviation professionals who recognized authentic competence when they witnessed it in action. The truth was finally emerging through multiple channels: federal investigation, media coverage, industry recognition, and colleague testimony. Sarah Martinez had been systematically destroyed for possessing exactly the technical expertise and professional integrity that aviation safety required, while those who persecuted her had compromised the very standards they were supposed to protect. The system was beginning to correct itself. But the damage to Sarah's career and the broader implications for aviation safety would require comprehensive reforms to prevent similar injustices from occurring in the future. The phone call came at 6:30 in the morning, 3 days after the emergency landing that had transformed Sarah Martinez from terminated employee to aviation hero. Federal Aviation Administration, Regional Administrator Patricia. Brennan's voice carried the authority of someone prepared to make institutional changes that would prevent similar injustices from occurring throughout the aviation industry. Ms. Martinez, I'm calling to offer you immediate reinstatement to your position with full back pay, benefits, and a formal apology from this administration, Brennan announced without preamble. Additionally, we're recommending you for promotion to Chief of Maintenance Operations with oversight responsibility for safety protocol compliance throughout the regional facility network. The offer represented complete vindication of Sarah's professional competence and technical judgment, but, more importantly, it acknowledged that her persecution had been fundamentally wrong and potentially dangerous to aviation safety. Her refusal to compromise maintenance standards had been proven correct in the most dramatic fashion possible, while those who had attacked her credibility were now facing serious consequences for their actions. Harrington's termination had been announced the previous evening through a terse press release that cited fundamental disagreements about operational philosophy and safety protocol implementation. His customer service approach had been thoroughly discredited by the investigation's findings, while his systematic persecution of competent personnel had exposed the facility to significant legal and regulatory liability. Morrison found himself demoted to assistant supervisor pending completion of the federal investigation into his cooperation with Harrington's campaign against Sarah. His career prospects were severely damaged by his failure to protect a subordinate from persecution, while his compliance with directives that compromise safety standards had violated his professional responsibilities as a maintenance facility supervisor. The facility's transformation began immediately as Sarah returned to work with unprecedented authority to implement the safety-focused maintenance protocols that had always guided her professional judgment. Her first directive established mandatory grounding procedures for any aircraft with identified safety defects, regardless of customer complaints or operational inconvenience that might result from delayed departures. Tommy Rodriguez greeted Sarah's return with obvious relief and renewed respect for the mentor who had taught him that technical competence and professional integrity were inseparable qualities. "Ma'am, I want to apologize for not speaking up when they were attacking you," he said privately. "I was afraid for my job, but I should have defended what I knew was right." Sarah's response reflected the leadership philosophy that would guide her new responsibilities. Everyone faces situations where standing up for principles requires personal risk. The important thing is learning from those experiences and finding the courage to act correctly when similar situations arise in the future. Her lack of bitterness impressed everyone who had witnessed her persecution and vindication. David Reyes was promoted to senior maintenance supervisor under Sarah's leadership, a recognition of his technical competence and his belated attempts to support her during the persecution campaign. His experience provided valuable insight into the institutional pressures that could corrupt safety decisions when business considerations were allowed to override technical requirements. The new maintenance protocols established clear procedures for protecting mechanics who identified safety defects from retaliation by customers or management personnel. Sarah's experience had demonstrated the vulnerability of maintenance professionals who lacked institutional support when their technical judgments conflicted with business interests or customer preferences. Aircraft owner Thomas Patterson found his business facing federal investigation for potential safety violations related to his pressure on facility management to minimize maintenance requirements. His construction company's aviation operations were subjected to comprehensive audits that revealed a pattern of maintenance deferrals and regulatory compliance issues that extended far beyond the control cable problems Sarah had identified. The Federal Aviation Administration used Sarah's case as the foundation for new regulatory protections for maintenance personnel who reported safety defects or refused to compromise inspection standards. The Martinez Protocols established whistleblower protections and mandatory investigation procedures that would prevent similar persecution campaigns from succeeding in the future. Industry publications featured Sarah's story as a case study in the importance of protecting technical expertise from business pressures that could compromise aviation safety. Professional maintenance organizations adopted her experience as an example of the kind of integrity that the industry needed to maintain public confidence in civilian aviation operations. The Phoenix Flight School, whose aircraft Sarah had helped save during the emergency, established a scholarship program in her name for military veterans transitioning to civilian aviation careers. The fund recognized that her military training had provided exactly the technical competence and crisis management skills that civilian aviation needed, but often failed to value appropriately. Regional aviation facilities began recruiting experienced military maintenance personnel, specifically because Sarah's example had demonstrated the value of technical training that prioritized safety over convenience. Her vindication created new opportunities for veterans whose skills had previously been undervalued in civilian aviation environments that emphasized customer service over technical excellence. Sarah's promotion to Chief of Maintenance Operations provided her with authority to implement systemic changes that would protect other competent professionals from the kind of persecution she had endured. Her first initiative established peer review procedures that prevented individual managers from targeting mechanics whose technical judgments conflicted with business preferences. The facility's safety record improved dramatically under Sarah's leadership as maintenance decisions returned to being based on technical requirements rather than customer service considerations. Aircraft groundings increased initially as previously. Deferred maintenance issues were addressed, but accident prevention and regulatory compliance improved significantly. Professional pilot organizations invited Sarah to speak at safety conferences about the importance of supporting maintenance personnel who identified potential problems before they became catastrophic failures. Her presentations emphasized that safety was everyone's responsibility, not just the mechanic who discovered defects that might inconvenience aircraft operations. The media attention surrounding Sarah's vindication inspired similar investigations at aviation facilities throughout the region as mechanics found courage to report safety compromises they had previously accepted as normal business practice. Her example demonstrated that competence could survive institutional persecution when supported by professional networks and regulatory oversight. Federal investigators used the documentation from Sarah's case to identify patterns of safety compromise that extended throughout the civilian aviation industry. Her systematic persecution had revealed vulnerabilities in regulatory oversight that allowed business considerations to override technical requirements when proper protections were in place. Lisa Chun received counseling and additional training about her responsibilities to support subordinates who identified safety concerns, but her cooperation with the investigation prevented more serious disciplinary action. Her experience illustrated how institutional pressure could compromise professional judgment even among fundamentally competent personnel. The facility's customer base evolved as aircraft owners who prioritized safety over convenience were attracted by the improved maintenance standards Sarah implemented. Operators who demanded accommodation of unsafe practices found their business unwelcome under the new management philosophy that treated safety as non-negotiable. Training programs for new maintenance personnel now included specific instruction about protecting safety decisions from business pressure, using Sarah's experience as an example of both the challenges competent mechanics might face and the importance of maintaining professional integrity despite institutional pressure. 1 year after her vindication, Chief of Maintenance Operations Sarah Martinez stood in the same hangar where her persecution had begun, surrounded by mechanics who understood that their primary responsibility was preventing accidents rather than accommodating customer preferences. The facility had become a model for safety-focused aviation maintenance that other operations sought to emulate. The emergency landing that had vindicated her competence was now studied in aviation schools as an example of how technical expertise could overcome equipment failure when applied with professional skill and calm judgment. Peterson, fully recovered from his traumatic experience, regularly credited Sarah's guidance with saving multiple lives through her exceptional maintenance knowledge. Sarah's military commendations had been joined by civilian aviation awards recognizing her technical competence, professional integrity, and contributions to industry safety standards. Her apartment now displayed recognition from professional organizations that understood the value of protecting excellence rather than persecuting it for threatening mediocrity. The ocean of challenges that had once seemed impossible to navigate had become a source of professional satisfaction as Sarah discovered that competence, when properly supported and protected, could transform entire institutions. Her quiet excellence had survived systematic persecution to become the foundation for changes that would protect future generations of aviation professionals. Excellence had triumphed over expedience. Integrity had overcome institutional corruption. And Sarah Martinez had proven that sometimes the most powerful response to persecution is simply refusing to compromise the principles that define professional competence. The aviation industry was safer because she had never surrendered her commitment to doing the job correctly, regardless of the personal cost. 5 years later, Admiral Patricia Brennan, now serving as the Federal Aviation Administration's Director of Safety Operations, stood before Congress delivering testimony about the Martinez protocols and their impact on aviation safety. Her words carried the weight of statistical evidence: a 43% reduction in maintenance-related incidents, a 67% increase in safety defect reporting, and 0 retaliation cases against mechanics who identified critical problems. The Sarah Martinez case taught us that protecting competence is protecting lives, Admiral Brennan testified. When we allow excellence to be persecuted for inconveniencing the wrong people, we don't just destroy careers, we compromise the safety of everyone who trusts our aviation system. Sarah Martinez, now serving as the FAA as Regional Chief Inspector for Aviation Maintenance, watched the testimony from her office overlooking Phoenix Sky Harbor. Her desk displayed photos from countless facilities she had transformed, letters from mechanics who found courage to speak up because of her example, and a framed image of the Cessna 172 she had helped save, now restored and flying safely with proper maintenance. Protocols. Her story had become required reading at aviation schools. Her protocols had prevented dozens of potential accidents, and her quiet dignity under persecution had inspired a generation of professionals to choose integrity over convenience. But perhaps most importantly, she had proven that sometimes the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone underestimates. The woman they called equipment failure had become the foundation upon which modern aviation safety standards were built. Her refusal to compromise had saved not just 2 lives during one emergency, but countless lives through the systemic changes her persecution had ultimately inspired. If this story of courage and integrity inspired you, hit that subscribe button and join our community of over 500,000 viewers who believe that excellence should be celebrated, not persecuted. Which part of Sarah's journey resonated most with you? Drop a comment below. We read every single one and love hearing from amazing people around the world who understand that sometimes the biggest victories come from simply refusing to compromise your principles. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss our weekly stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Your support helps us share these powerful reminders that integrity always wins in the end, even when the journey seems impossible.